Good evening and welcome to the Warren Files. I'm your host, Chris McKinnell, and tonight I'm coming to you from my home in Nova Iguaçu, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I apologize for being a little late this evening. For some reason, the video crashed. But welcome. You're watching the Spirit Realm Network. Please like and share. And do the same for the Warren Legacy Foundation. Every time you share our videos, every time you share the Warren Legacy Foundation, that's more people that learn about us that we can help. And that's really all I'm doing this for, so we can help as many people as we possibly can. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a few cases. We're going to start with Amityville and my grandparents' experiences there. We'll move on to the haunting in Connecticut. We'll also get into a horrifying case in Scotland, and there are a couple of other things I'd like to talk about, but we'll see if we can get to all of them this evening. If not, there's always next week. So thank you for joining me. You know, back in 1976, my grandparents were called about a case. It was Channel 5 out of New York City that contacted them and said, look, we've got a haunted house. We want to find out if it's for real. And my grandparents checked their schedules and said, yeah, we can check it out for you. And that night, the same night, my grandfather was down in his office in the museum. He had an office at the end of the museum in a separate tiny room. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And he was working, cataloging some files and some tapes that he had. And there's a corridor that leads down to the main house. It's a separate building, but there's this like dungeon-like corridor that leads to the museum. And he heard the heavy wooden door open. And then he heard 3 footsteps. He assumed it was my grandmother bringing him some coffee, so he called out to her and he said, Lorraine, I'm in the back. Come on in, honey. And then he realized he had only heard 3 footsteps. And the room got incredibly cold. He could see his breath. And the lights started going on and off. And he knew something bad was happening. He said it sounded like a whirlwind coming down the hallway. As he walked out into the main part of the museum, the door to the corridor opened. And this whirlwind came across the museum to the left side, over to where we keep Annabelle. And, excuse me, those are the cats. He said that as he watched, it started to coalesce into a form, and he realized he had to do something quickly. He picked up his holy water and his cross. He brandished the cross in front of him. He stepped forward and he threw the holy water at it. And he said, by the power of Jesus Christ, I command you to be gone. And the thing advanced on him. And he, again, threw the holy water on it. He told it to back off and by the power of God. At which point it swirled around. It went through the door and down the hallway. My grandfather knew it was on its way to my grandmother. He wasn't about to go down that corridor because you don't want to be trapped in a small space with that kind of entity, that kind of incredible, intense creature. So he ran out the back way, and as he was going up the stairs, my grandmother was in bed waiting for my grandfather to come to bed. She was reading actually a biography on Padre Pio. He will be very important as we move on in this story. And again, that's the cats. Don't think anything of it. But as I skipped over a part that was very important. My grandfather also heard these sounds like wild animals fighting outside. This was before the entity had come into the room, into the museum. I apologize for missing that part. But as he's running up the stairs, my grandmother immediately knows something is coming toward her. And she becomes very, very apprehensive, very worried. After all, it is 3 o'clock in the morning. And this thing comes barreling up. It goes through the kitchen, it goes through the living room, and she has the sense that it's looking for her. Obviously, it wasn't actually looking for her. It knew exactly where she was. It was trying to terrify her. But it came through, and at first she was dumbfounded as this ugly black mass appeared right in front of her. And the dogs went crazy. They were terrified, cowering. And she picked up the biography, and she was demanding by the power of Jesus Christ that this thing disappear. It swirled around again, and just as my grandfather was coming through the back kitchen door, it swirled around, went through the living room, and then it went straight up the chimney. That's when they knew that they were getting into a case that was going to be quite difficult and quite devastating. We see this a lot on really bad cases where things ramp up before we even get there. They're trying to intimidate us so that we will back off. And of course that didn't faze my grandparents. So they agreed to meet with the Lutzes, George and Kathy Lutz and the kids. George and Kathy would not go back to the house. They were staying with Kathy's mother. And they wanted nothing from inside the house, except for one thing. They did ask my grandfather for the deed to the house. They wanted to be able to sell the house. Unfortunately, see, George was, he was a good guy. He was a biker. He was a tough guy. This was a blended family, and he was the stepdad. And they had sunk in everything they owned to get into this house, and they had gotten it for a song. Of course they had. It had been the site of multiple murders when Ronald DeFeo picked up his gun, murdered his parents and his brothers and sisters while they all slept in bed on their bellies. Not one of them had gotten up. And that had happened just a year earlier. So they got the house very cheaply. My grandparents entered the Amityville home, and they said it was a very nice place. It looked wonderful, but it had this horrible, horrible atmosphere. And Channel 5 wanted them to do a seance with 2 other mediums to see what they could contact there. And it didn't go well. Nothing horrifying happened, but it stirred things up. Then Channel 5, one of the cameramen and a photographer, went with my grandmother up the stairs. And she said as she was going up the stairs, it felt like she was walking against a rushing river, a torrent. Just the energy hitting her, forcing her backward. And it was incredibly evil. A photographer took a photo of of my grandmother on the landing, and you can see in this photo a little boy's face looking out of one of the bedroom doors. We're going to try and put that up in comments so you can see that. I'm not sure if it's going to work out. We are trying. This is not a little boy. People have said it looks like one of the DeFeo boys who had been murdered. This thing was not human. You could tell by looking at its eyes. We'll also share a close-up photo if we can. If we're not able to do that, I will try to find a way to put them underneath the video later. This was a demon. At the same time, my grandfather was going down into the basement, and he was looking around, and he could see that the food in the freezer downstairs, there was a ton of food, and they didn't want any of it. They didn't want anything out of this house. And then he said it felt like a wet blanket had been thrown across his shoulders, and just it was super heavy and forcing him downward, down onto his knees. And he said it was an amazingly difficult feeling. I apologize for the cats. They don't normally act like this. It's very strange. They never make noises like this. They also discovered this small room in the basement. It had been kind of blocked off and it couldn't be seen unless you were looking for it. And inside there were what looked like satanic symbols on the floor, and there were animal bones. So this had been used for rituals at some point. My grandmother was then in the living room, I believe, and there's a giant moose head in one of the photos. And if you look closely, and we'll try and share this with you as well, you can see the face of a monk looking down at my grandmother, looking directly at my grandmother. We'll also share a picture of Padre Pio with you, and you will see that that's exactly who was looking at my grandmother. Also, if you look at the tip of one of the moose antlers, you can see the head of a man with long dark hair, a beard, and a mustache, also looking in the direction of my grandmother. It's the spitting image of Ronald DeFeo Jr. Now this is pretty amazing. This is long before digital photographs. It's not like Channel 5 News was going to be digitally or altering photos anyway. And these things were caught by their photographers. Pretty amazing stuff. You know, I've met the Lutzes. They are real people who really were bothered by this. It followed them for years afterward. And people said this was all this money-making scheme and they was cooked up over wine and cheese with the lawyer. It's all bullcrap. They actually never made any money off of the movies or the book at all, not a penny. They suffered an awful lot for this. There were other things that happened, but I mentioned how my grandparents were driving through Pennsylvania in one of my other videos, and they had made a comment that not even Amityville or Annabelle could hurt them there. And that's when something smacked into the back of their car and knocked them off the road. You have to take these forces very, very seriously. You can't give in to them, you can't back down to them, but you must be respectful of them. It's just like an electrician. You know, he recognizes the power that he's working with, and he's respectful of it. So this is a similar analogy. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about, by the way, are there any questions about Amityville before we move on? Because if there are, I'll be happy to take those questions now. Otherwise, I would like to talk to you about the haunting in Connecticut. All right? This was actually one of my cases. I was pretty young at the time. I was about 23 or 24 years old, and I had just come back from serving in the Peace Corps. I was in West Africa for a couple of years, and in a country called Mali. And I was there with my cousin, and I was helping him and training him. He had never been on any really big cases at that point. So I was there helping him and teaching him, I should say. The case started with the oldest boy, Carmen Snedeker and her family, Al and the kids, had to move to Connecticut because the oldest boy had, I believe it was leukemia. And he was being treated at UConn Medical Center in Farmington, Connecticut. And they found this really nice home. The top floor was rented by someone else, and they got the entire bottom floor to themselves plus the basement. It had been a former funeral home. Amazingly, and I don't know why, all of the stuff from the funeral home was still in the basement. The embalming table was there. The different plaques and memorial markers for graves were there in the basement. The chains that raised the coffin up to the main bedroom were still there. The draining pit was still there for the blood. It was pretty awful. And there were 2 French doors, both to the second room in the bedroom, but also to the stairs that led up to the master bedroom. And the older boy, wanted to sleep downstairs in the basement. And, he was pretty happy at first, but then he was saying that there was this man staring at him in his sleep when he was trying to sleep. And he could hear chains rattling. I did too. And he started to have behavioral changes, and he started to get violent. And some of that can be blamed on all of the different things he was going through, but the truth is, just as the Lutzes had all of these other vulnerabilities, this family had vulnerabilities because they were dealing with a child who was dying or could be dying. And so he was the weakest, and this thing went after him. Eventually, because they brought him to psychiatrists and psychologists, he was institutionalized. That's when the entity switched to Carmen. Once Carmen started getting attacked, and she was attacked both physically and sexually by this incubus. At that point, they knew they needed help, and they contacted a priest who contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren. My grandparents sent me in there. We went together the first day, did the intake, and then my grandparents said, "Chris, we want you to stay here." And so for the next 9.5 weeks, every single night I was there, recording everything that happened. It was a horrifying case. There was one afternoon, because God knows, at night it got so bad with her being under attack, whether it be in the bedroom, in the kitchen, it would just slam her, and all of a sudden she'd be on the ground, and she'd either be getting sexually attacked, or it would be as though she was falling down into a horrifying whirlwind pit, and she felt like she was being lost, and I would have to pull her out of that pit. Even back then, I was only developing my abilities, and it was overwhelming to feel that heaviness, that oppressive energy. So one afternoon, I was sleeping in the master bedroom. It was the only room that had air conditioning, and it was summer. And I was sleeping right where the bodies would come out of a hatch in the floor. I was on the floor. And as I was sleeping, I could hear footsteps coming up the stairs from the basement, and then the French doors opening, and then those same footsteps walking right over to me. And I could feel this thing just leaning over me, oppressive, trying to terrify me. And in my head, I'm saying over and over again, by the power of Jesus Christ, I command you to be gone. And I'm summoning all of my faith, and I'm surrounding myself in the white light. And honestly, I couldn't say how long it was. It felt like forever, but it was probably only a minute or two. And then it was gone. My cousin. There was one Saturday morning. The whole family was sleeping together in the living room. Everybody in sleeping bags. And my cousin was in there. And all of a sudden he starts screaming because he can feel these claws coming up his leg, clawing their way up his leg. And he's terrified, of course. And he's jumping out of the sleeping bag. And it was one of the 2 ferrets. that they owned that had gotten loose. Not everything is paranormal. But having said that, there was another night where he had gone outside, I believe, to have a smoke, and because we didn't smoke in the house, we wouldn't allow smoking in the house because smoke can help spirit manifest in the smoke. And as he turned to go back inside, this gargoyle face was right there in front of him. Scared the hell out of him again. He didn't come back for over a week. It was just me in the house for over a week. Another interesting thing that had happened, and this one, I'm sure if you Google, you can find proof of this. There was an old evening news magazine, entertainment magazine, called PM Magazine back in the day. And it was on at like 7:30 at night. We had done an interview with PM Magazine about this case. This was back in the day when we advertised what we did. And that night, me and the kids were outside, and Carmen called us all in because the program was about to start. Just as the program was about to start, I'm turning to go in the house, and the transformer on top of the telephone pole, the electrical transformer, we're talking something the size of a big garbage bin, exploded like dynamite had been put inside of it. Just blew off the entire pole, knocked out the power for all of Southington, Connecticut. Obviously, we didn't see the program. These things are incredibly powerful, and energy manipulation is the simplest thing they can do. Eventually, after that 9.5 weeks and after documenting everything, Bishop McKenna was brought in, and he did an amazing job. He was easily one of the two holiest men I've ever met in my entire life. The other one was the Dalai Lama. I was lucky enough to spend a long weekend and spend time with the Dalai Lama. It was pretty amazing. But Bishop McKenna and I worked on many cases together, and he truly was spiritually connected to God. Truly amazing man. He did an amazing job of cleansing that home. There is something else I should add. The woman upstairs, there was a woman living upstairs. She also reported the same phenomena, that she was being sexually attacked by this entity, but she claimed that she liked it and didn't want it to go. It made things a lot harder. But it was over, and Carmen's son was taken out of the institution. It was probably for the best that he was there during my time. I got to know him afterward, and I helped counsel him afterward. He had PTSD. Unfortunately, we did lose him a few years later. Leukemia. I was in Menorca, Spain recently, and my colleague and friend, Laura, took me to this old hospital. And at night, they say you can hear people running up and down the hallways and hear people screaming and crying or laughing. This was an old mental institution, I believe. And now they're renovating the thing to turn it into an old folks home. I can't think of anything that is a worse idea than a haunted former asylum that's now being turned into an old folks home. These are an incredibly vulnerable population. And because when you're near death, you're also very, very open to the paranormal and to spirits. It is much easier for them to be experiencing whatever has been left there. I certainly hope that there is a terrific cleansing of the place before people start moving in. We'll see what happens. Before I move on to the next case, I also wanted to point out to you that we have a new program starting as soon as I'm done this evening. It's called Secrets of the Golden Runes, and it's run by a woman named Kathy. She's a Reiki master, and she will be giving readings using runes. I think this should be a very interesting program. I'm certainly going to check it out, and I hope you'll check it out as well. Remember to like and share the Spirit Realm Network, and please, the Warren Legacy Foundation. You can check out all of my videos on the Warren Files YouTube channel. There's over 40 of them there. There's plenty of good information, and I hope you will like and share that and subscribe. The more people we can reach out to, the better we can do our jobs. Thank you, I appreciate it. So let's see. Angel Martinez was asking, was there really a well under the house in Amityville? Honest to God, I don't know. My grandfather said that the house and the history of the property went back to the 1690s. And even before then, Native Americans stayed away from that area. They considered it either holy or cursed. And they would not bury people there. They wouldn't have anything to do with that land. But throughout time, there were many murders, many missing people, many suicides. The place is plagued with awful memories. And Millie Weaver asked if Amityville is still active. I was talking to a friend of mine who does podcasts, and he's kept in touch with one of the reporters who went with my grandparents on that case. And this woman has kept in contact with all the different owners of the house. And she said that even though it's not reported, and why would it be, because look how everybody's been ridiculed. Yeah, things have been happening. Not to everybody, but even recently there was a husband and wife, and the husband died at a young age, and she was just happy to sell the house at a loss. She wanted out. So there's something still going on there, absolutely. But it's waiting for the right person. If you're not open to it, you're safe. Thank God. Yeah, Mandy asked or says that there was a theory that the oldest sister was involved somehow. But just like her, I'm not sure what the truth is of that either. I've heard that she was also found in the hallway, but I don't know if that's true. Either way, we do know that Ronald DeFeo did kill them. And his father actually had made a pilgrimage up there. His father was not a nice guy. Really rough man. But his father had gone up to Montreal and bought a bunch of Catholic statues. And he put them around the house, outside the house, inside the house. And when asked, he said, "I've got a demon on my back." Everyone assumed they were talking about his son, Ronald. But maybe not. Christy Rose was asking, was this the case where Lorraine never liked to talk about that personally targeted her and didn't like to speak of it? Do you think the place will ever be livable because people can't seem to keep it going as a home? There are a couple of cases that my grandmother really disliked. Amityville, though, she didn't have a problem talking about. She talked about that all the time with people. It was an important case to talk about. It was a famous case, and it allowed them to propel themselves into the public consciousness so that they were then able to make contact with more people and help more people. Again, it's a double-edged sword, this popularity, publicity thing. I'm not comfortable with it myself. I hate it, to be quite honest with you. I apologize, but I don't like doing these shows. I'll never be very comfortable doing this kind of thing. But I do know it's very important, because if you don't know where to come to get help, then I can't help you. And it's exactly how my grandparents felt. Amy 48 O'Donnell was asking, did my grandparents ever determine the cause of the evil from Amityville? My grandmother, when she went down in the basement, said it was as close to hell as she ever hopes to get. We know, and as a matter of fact, the Channel 5 had said to them, so are there ghosts in the house? Is it haunted? He says, no, there are no ghosts, but yeah, it's haunted. And news didn't understand that until they said, yeah, it's an inhuman spirit. This is a vortex of evil, and there is nothing human here. It's completely evil. But where did it originate from? I'm not sure. And I'm not sure they ever figured that out. I know my grandfather looked into the history. I know he really researched it. But I also am not positive that everything he learned is accurate. He said that there was an escaped witch from Salem, a man who had settled on that property. And that after his death, there were knockings, rappings, and other noises coming from the cabin that he had built. I don't know if that was true. I don't know where he got that information. I'd like to find out. So if anybody out there is a good researcher, please let me know. Did the movie A Haunting in Connecticut portray the real events accurately? Keena, thank you for asking that question. To be quite honest with you, I watched the first 40 minutes of that movie and I was appalled. It was terrible. I heard how it ended and everything else. It was awful. No, it did not portray anything accurately. The truth is, and I hope it's still available on YouTube, A Haunting in Connecticut. The Discovery Channel documentary. It was a 2-hour show that accurately portrayed what happened in that case. Definitely worth checking out if you can find it online. I'll see if I can find it and share it on the Warren Legacy Foundation page. Christy Rose also asks, do you think places, states are personally targeted or bad? Because Missouri has a lot of bad. Exorcist movie was from St. Louis. Is Connecticut bad as well? Equally as haunted, I may say. Honestly, everywhere where there are people, there is the paranormal. Everywhere. And the more people there are, or the more history, especially the more bloody history, the more activity you're going to have, because tragedy creates the ghost phenomena. And it also allows these negative entities to fester and grow. So it's not any particular state, but certainly certain sites become far more overwhelming to people who are open to the paranormal. Like the location that is becoming an old folks' home, do I feel that most of these places or lands can be saved with deep spiritual cleansings, or do I feel that they will always have the tendency to retain and bounce back to that evil and darkness? It depends on how bad it is and whether or not we're talking about human or inhuman spirits. Inhuman spirits can be gotten rid of. Human spirits, unfortunately, have free will, and it makes it much harder to have them cross over. Nicole Gaspard Moreno was asking, why do I think that negative entities prey on the weak? Because like any predator, the weak are easier to defeat. The weak are easier to get what they want, their meal. And their meal is negativity. It's depression, it's hatred, it's anger, it's despondency, and eventually it's loss of faith and suicide or murder. All of these things that they feed off of, that helps them to grow in power. And if you're a very strong person with strong convictions, then you can ward these things off, at least much better than the weaker link in your family. And do I protect myself before doing these shows? I protect myself every morning and every night. I do not do anything extra for these particular programs, or for any program, to be quite honest. These are just programs. The stuff that I share with you, I don't expect it to be harmful to you, and I certainly know it isn't harmful to me. This is my life. This is what I do. And as strange as that may seem to most people, to me, it's just living. It's just what I do. And Tanya, and I apologize, I'm going to say your last name wrong, I bet. Sarachi, can an evil spirit attach itself to your belongings? Yeah, of course it can. Annabelle is a great example of that. It belonged to a nurse, and this entity attached itself. It happens all the time. Okay. Did Ghost Adventures go to the Warren Museum? Not that I'm aware of. Tony Spira brought Annabelle to whatever that guy's name is on Ghost Adventures. I'm not a fan. And I'm not a fan because as an entertainer, he's fantastic. P.T. Barnum to the max. But he's also a liar. And he also teaches people terrible things. If you actually did what he does, you would get badly hurt. I don't think he actually believes in the paranormal, to be honest. That's all I'm going to say about that. I'm sorry. Eric Cabana was saying he picks up dead people for a living. Why does he never have a spiritual experience? Well, it could be personal. It could be that you're not open to it, and most men, I will say, are not very open to it. They're extremely rational. They're not usually as emotional, so they're not as sensitive. And they can deny things and they can write things off. You know, the paranormal could happen right in front of your eyes and you will look for a natural explanation. Also, most ghosts don't haunt their bodies. They go back to where they felt most comfortable in life. They'll stick around their body for a short time, but not for a long time. By short, I mean very short. And it depends. You know, if they pass over normally, they're going instantaneously. Otherwise, they're going to go back to where they were most comfortable. They're going to, at first, look around their surroundings and be like, what's just happened? But then they're going to either go to where they've got unfinished business or go back to where they felt safe in life. All right. Paul Russell asked, can I use a spirit box in my home without protection? No. No. Absolutely do not do that. Do not use Ouija boards. Do not use spirit boxes. Do not use automatic writing. Do not do seances. Do not do anything with spirit communication. People do it, and they do it well. But an awful lot of them get hurt. And when you don't know exactly what you're doing, it is incredibly easy for you to create an attachment and for that thing to leech off of you. You know, you might get lucky. You know, you play 100 times and get human voices and they're real humans, and that's great. But you're constantly opening that door and anything can come through. Please don't do it. It is a slippery, slippery slope. And the one wrong word from you and anything bad can happen. All right, I'm going to get into the next case because this one is extremely involved. And it's pretty horrifying. It takes place now in northern Scotland, somewhere in northern Scotland. And this woman, the main focus of the case, was abused as a child by her family. And then when she was 16, she ran away from home. And she was homeless for a number of years, just surviving on the streets. And she learned how to protect herself and learned how to get ahead as best she could, or survive, I should say. She was a real survivor. And she had 3 children, living children, by 3 men. One of them was actually in vitro fertilization. And then she was up in Northern Ireland, and she met a man and fell in love, and she got pregnant, and she lost the baby. And it turns out that he was a member of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. And he decided that it was all her fault. He wanted her gone. And the authorities got a coded message from the IRA, which is normal, saying if she doesn't leave, she will be dead by sundown. The authorities contacted her, and she said, "Can I at least visit my baby's grave before I leave?" And the IRA said no. So she had to escape. And she picked some place that she had family, and she had spent time there as a child. And it's a very wild place with a great tragic history and a lot of death, a huge amount of death, right where she was placed by council housing. Council housing is welfare housing in Britain. And that's when things really got bad. But about 9 years ago, she had been in a antique shop in London. This is before the IRA, before the baby was lost. And she had found this heart locket. And if we can, we're going to share that with you, a picture of that with you as well. Now, this is pretty darned amazing. Two of the people that have programs here on the Spirit Realm Network also happen to be board members and regional directors of services for the Warren Legacy Foundation. That would be Michelle Roos and Catherine Sorillos. And they are incredibly gifted mediums. And when we started working with the family, and yeah, I'm skipping ahead, but I'll get back. When we started working with the family, they could see that there was this locket and that there was this horrible attachment to it, something that made them physically ill to look upon, even before they knew there was a locket, knew that she had bought it, anything. And then it was confirmed that it existed. It is now in our repository in Iowa. This is where all of our haunted items go to be safe. It's not open to the public. It is a place where we don't destroy them because we don't want to release the energies, but we lock them down so that they are safe for you. So, when they moved to this house, the woman and her 3 children, one is 16, 8, and 2 years old at the time. This was a year ago. All hell broke loose. They had completed a journey. You see, this is going to sound amazing. The woman had been tormented through lifetimes by a human spirit who had made a pact with an inhuman, or an entity that had never lived on earth, something that would be termed a demon. And this human spirit was attached to her and following her. That locket had actually belonged to her in a past lifetime. There were 5 mediums involved in this case, and they all confirmed that to me. It was cursed. And she never wore it, but she felt such a need to have it. She let her kids wear it, but she herself wouldn't wear it. And that became a problem, the children wearing it as well, because there was an attachment there. And this human entity feels very possessive of her, feels that he owns her, and he would appear to her. Tall, red eyes, dark, evil. The inhuman entity would appear as a red figure or even as a devil dog with red eyes. And this thing caused a lot of trouble for the mediums involved in the case. I shared with you one story of one of the mediums in Portugal. There were two in Portugal, who was attacked the first night that she was making contact with the family. And the sound of a baby crying in the backyard, and then it sounded like cats screaming and crying out back. And she knew from her spirit guide she should not go out there. You see, she is a medium, and spirits actually come through her. And they told her how to protect herself, and so she did that. But she was only one of 5, and every one of them was attacked. The two that did the most astral projection and cleansing of the home and cleansing of the people were Michelle Roos and Catherine Sorlos. Karen Tibbets-Williams in New Zealand was another one, and then the two in Portugal. Before we had gotten involved, though, another team from Northern England had come into the house, and they'd gotten a lot of different readings and a lot of evidence. That's not something we worry about nearly as much, but it's important when you're dealing with the church. And so we will get as much as we can for that reason. We did go to the local parish and try to get them to help, and they flat out said there's no such thing as the devil. These things are ridiculous. We don't believe in any of it. 2 different priests. Unfortunately, that's typical of a parish. We then reached out to the local monastery. Monasteries usually are a little more worldly, a little more open to this type of thing. They're more spiritual. Not in this case. Originally, one of the monks was very interested in helping, but the one in charge absolutely shut us down and would not help us. That's when I had to have our mediums go in there remotely, because where this is located is so difficult to get to, in the winter months especially, that it wasn't someplace that we could just go to. And I was meant to go there in March, but then COVID-19 hit and I wasn't able to get to Britain. But once we were involved, we noticed that the poltergeist activity was ramping up. It was getting much worse. One of the weirdest things was she had a bunch of cats, and they would find mice every night and bring them to one space in the kitchen, one little part of the floor, and they would disembowel them but not kill them. And then when she would try to sweep them up and throw them away, the cats would go crazy. They would start screeching and howling, which is not normal for them. And she was very worried about that. The dog would also act very strange and start screaming and then cowering, would stare into one space up on the wall for long periods of time. Then it started to affect the children. And we noticed that the woman, the mother, was having personality changes. There was also a boyfriend in the house at the time, which seemed to really enrage the human entity. He did not want this woman to have anything to do with any other men, because he owned her. Oh, good. I just want to make sure I wasn't running out of time here. And this thing started to sexually attack her. And then when she would go to her 2-year-old, and her 2-year-old has some developmental disabilities, and it is gifted, the little girl would say, "Mommy, the bad man's here. The bad man won't stop staring at me." And this would be while she's having her diaper changed. And she'd be screaming and yelling and wouldn't be able to sleep at night because this thing would come in and terrorize her. And the 8-year-old who slept there as well was also seeing these things and hearing a voice telling her to do bad things, including kill the 2-year-old. It took a lot of counseling. It took a lot of explaining what they had to do to make certain changes to shore them up. And it took a lot of remote cleansing, a lot of one-on-one with each child. The 16-year-old spent an awful lot of time at her boyfriend's house. We're not sure how much she was affected. But I witnessed the poltergeist phenomena. I heard it. I saw it. It was real. It was happening. Luckily. And when I had talked to the woman and explained, look, you're under oppression, this is what's going on, she really got defensive and didn't want to have anything to do with us for about a month. And then she reached out to Catherine Sorlos, and said, look, the boyfriend's gone, I really need help. Catherine and another remotely went in there, and Catherine especially did remote cleansings on each person and on the house. And since April, nothing has been happening there. Now, having said that, we are sure that if another man comes into the house, we could see things ramping up again. And as soon as I can get to Britain, I'm going to be going there and checking things out and doing what I can right on site to cleanse the home spiritually and get rid of these entities. The fact that there's an inhuman entity that's supplying all the power means that it's something that we can break. And that's why we're going to do it. Make sure that I haven't missed anything on this. No, that's it. All right, so let me see if you've got any more questions for me, and I'm pretty sure you do. Robert Ramirez was asking if we noticed that a negative entity is rooted to us or attached to us, I assume he means, how can we move it away? Is it easy? Not exactly. It can be. It depends on what your faith is and what your personal spiritual strength is. I would suggest start with a blessing. Baptism is actually a form of exorcism, and that can be very good to do. Finding out how this attachment got started, extremely important. That helps us have a clue on how we can break it. This isn't the kind of question that is easy to answer because everyone is different, and therefore there are a million different tactics we have to use to help you. It's like, how do you cure cancer? Well, it depends. What's your particular kind of cancer and how did it get started, and were you exposed to something? What were you exposed to? All sorts of questions that need to be asked before I can easily give you that answer. Nina Terabile asked, is sleep paralysis paranormally related? When she was 15 years old, she had it every night for 2 months and would see a black hooded shadow figure. Okay, thing about sleep paralysis, and there's actually a great documentary on that. I wish I could recall the name. It is psychological most of the time, even when you see that dark figure, because it's rooted in this waking nightmare. Having said that, if you are in a haunting, if you are in a haunted home, or if you've got an attachment, then no, it is probably paranormally related, and that is very, very common. These things latch onto you at your most vulnerable. My question for you would be, what happened afterward? What did you do to stop it, or did it just fade away on its own? If it faded away on its own, chances are it was purely psychological. And Connie Calder was asking, how do I know if a spirit guide is speaking to me through a pendulum, or if it's something else and possibly bad? All right, here's the thing. Whether it be tarot cards, a pendulum, automatic writing, there's nothing wrong with divination. It's fine. It's when you're calling on a spirit to communicate with you that's a problem. So if you're asking for answers, yes, no, maybe, what have you, there's nothing wrong with that. I found for myself when I used to do tarot cards, it was my way, my personal way of distancing myself from my own psychic abilities. I've never been comfortable with them. So for me, it was a way of saying, oh no, it's just the cards. When it isn't, it's really you. It's coming from you. Your interpretation is what's important, and how you feel about what you're seeing. And the same thing with the pendulum. Sometimes it's just your subconscious moving it one direction or another. Other times, it's a spirit guide, or it's your higher self, yourself moving you. Your spiritual self, that is. Okay? As I said, there is another program coming up in just a few minutes. It is, and I'm going to have to check this just again to make positively certain. Secrets of the Golden Runes. I didn't want to get that wrong because I love that title. I think it's pretty cool. Kathy will be with you in about 2 minutes. I hope you'll stay tuned, and I hope you'll join me again next week for the Warren Files here on the Spirit Realm Network. Please like, please share, please go to the Warren Files on YouTube, and please subscribe. We want to get the word out there so we can help people. That's why we do this. God bless you all. Have a great evening, and I'll see you again next week.